Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside the 605. Yes, we finally made it, almost done with a regular season of basketball. And next week on this show, we'll be talking about postseason games and getting you ready for regions and all the games that lead up to the SODAC 16 coming up in just a few short weeks. But we've still got a lot of fun stuff to get through over the last 7 days and what's coming up in the next 7 days. That's what we do right here on Inside the 605. I'm Jason Andera, and let's start with highlights from last week. One of the big headlines that you need to know is the Sioux Falls Christian boys in Class A have been awfully good over the last couple of seasons. They didn't lose it all last regular season, and they hadn't lost yet this regular season until last Friday when they visited Hull, Iowa, took on Western Christian, and that was their first loss in 37 straight regular season games. The Chargers in that game led by 8 with just over a minute left in the game, but the Wolfpack, who are ranked number 1 in Class 2A in Iowa, found a way to claw back and force overtime. They ended up trading surviving shots just to get to that first overtime. Then they advanced to a second overtime where finally Western Christian got the 89-86 victory. In the process, Griffin Goodberry scored 30 points for Sioux Falls Christian in the loss and also 29 points for Brant Wassener. So some really good individual performances, a really high-scoring double overtime game, two really good teams. But Sioux Falls Christian's streak of regular season games comes to an end. Another notable game from the last week of play. How about Rapid City Central? They are starting to play really well here at the end of the season, and they took out a ranked team on their home court. How did they do it? Well, Julius Duran hit a couple of clutch shots for the Cobblers down the stretch. They got the eventual overtime win, 62-58, over that ranked opponent in Harrisburg. Duran ended up with 27, Gilbert White with 23 in that win. Rapid City Central now 7-9 and back in the thick of things in the middle of the pack in Class AA, scratching and clawing for seeding so they can get set for the SODAC 16, which comes up, as we said, just a couple of weeks. So a lot of teams right now in AA clawing and scratching their ways up and down in the middle part of the rankings, possibly trying to get a home game in the top 8, but if not, being able to get as close as they can to the middle of the pack. Let's talk about girls basketball in Class B, the Centerville Tornadoes. Probably don't talk enough about this team, but they have been busy. Over a 4-day stretch, played 3 games and found a way to win all 3 games impressively against really good opponents. It started with a big test on Saturday as they played a very solid Andes Central Dakota Christian team. They had 4 players scoring double digits in that game. They claimed the victory and got the Great Plains Conference Championship with that win. They turn around on Monday and they take on a Class A contender in Elk Point. Tornadoes got a win in that one as well, a 12-point win this time. Izzy Eide has been doing it all season long, put up 19 points to lead the way. The team made 9 threes in that victory. And then Tuesday night, they barely got past St. Mary's, coming off a back-to-back game against a very quality opponent once again. A 57-52 win, the closest win they've had in quite some time. 18 points this time from Izzy Eide, and it was the team's 32nd straight victory. They are on quite a roll right now in Class B. Let's talk about some of the top performers coming up from the last 7 days. Here's a look at our list. We'll start with the girls. Sunny Bowman has been on this list a couple of times, and the Cheyenne Eagle Butte Guard had another huge performance on Saturday against Waupawa. 34 points, 11 rebounds, 6 steals, and 5 assists in a big W. Shania Ferguson, another player who's on this list multiple times, went for over 30 points in a game last week. Faith Frank out of Wall, 32-point, 14-rebound game for her in a win over Bridgewater Emory at the Dakota Wesleyan University Classic, Culver's Classic at the Corn Palace last week. Cadence Hover of Freeman, also a 30-point game, 35, 9, and also made 6 three-pointers in a win over Phillip on Friday, 67-63. They needed all those points from Cadence. Ashlyn Copel threw out a triple-double, big game for her, 23 points, 10 boards, 10 assists, and 6 block shots in a big win Tuesday night over Gregory. Just a ho-hum triple-double for Ashlyn Copel, the top-rated player in the state. Hazel Luthmers of DeSmet put up back-to-back unbelievable games. A 43.6 steal game, 8 rebounds in their win over ORR, and then she came back Tuesday night against Esteline and put up 32 points. So back-to-back 30-plus point games for Hazel. Great job for her and DeSmet playing well right at the end of the season. Olivia Paget put up a 25-point game against Lincoln and had a season high 10 field goals made in that game. She took that game over and they beat Lincoln big time 66-28 on Friday. Mia Reiner of Trip Delmont Armor, another 30-point game, but she also added 20 rebounds to make it that much more impressive. 36-20 for her in a win over Marty, and 36 of the 48 team points. It was a Reiner type of night, and she went to town. Amory Vandervorst of North Central made this list for the first time last week. She said, let's do it again with a 31-point performance, 6-rebound game against Northwestern on Saturday. And then how about J.C. Wolf of Chester? 33-point game. She gets to her 1,000th career point in style with that 33-point game and helped her team win 71-48 over Arlington. Time to look at the boys' top performers, the game changers from the last 7 days. And we start once again with Trevin Beckman. He continues to do it back-to-back 27-point games in wins over Freeman and Centerville last week. Julius Duran, we talked about a little bit from Rapid City Central, but 27-point game against Harrisburg, and he did it with grit. He had a lot of tough hoops at the end of the game, a lot of offensive rebounds put back, and some big shots from beyond the arc as well. Isaac Hunter of Miller put a 32-point game together against Todd County as the team won 74-63 on Saturday. And Thielen Kierstad of Wall had a 29-point game as well. A 69-52 win at the DWU Classic at the Corn Palace over Timber Lake. Brian Lowy, he's had a lot of these games this year, but a big one against a Class A team in Sioux Valley on Tuesday night. Went for 25 points, 17 boards as he dominated on their way to a 61-42 win. Marcus Talley with a 24.9 rebound, 6-assist game. Those are big games, especially against teams that are either receiving votes or in the top 5, which it was when they took on Washington on Tuesday night. And they ended up pulling away for an 8-point victory at home on Tuesday night. Ben Weber of Bridgewater Emory, how about this? A 40-point, 20-rebound game. We haven't seen many 40-point, 20-rebound games, but he absolutely torched it on Monday night as they took on Scotland Menno in a big way, 75-19 win. He also threw up a 24-point, 12-rebound game against White River at the DWU Classic on Saturday, so big week for Ben Weber. And Gilbert White Jr., we have to mention as well, another Rapid City Central player. He went for 28 points the following day after the overtime victory over Harrisburg as they defeated Yankton by 8 points in a win 58-50 at home on Saturday. Rapid City Central playing some really good ball right now. Time to move over to the real deal. Here's a conversation I recorded with 605 Sports' Ryan Deal earlier today. Time to visit with Ryan Deal, and we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, Ryan. Just a couple of games left in the regular season for some of these teams, and a lot of good games coming up. But before we look forward, let's reflect on what you've done in the last few days. Last week in the DWU Culver's Classic at the Corn Palace, a lot of good matchups. And on the girls' side, a couple of really interesting games, including one that we hardly ever see, or maybe never see, Ethan and Parkston.
Yeah, first time Ethan and Parkston girls basketball has played a game since 1981. And anybody that knows me know I like the historical type of stuff. And somebody thought it was in a district tournament. Some people thought it was in a state tournament. And I did look, and it was in the 1981 state tournament, a 7th place game Ethan and Parkston played, which is kind of weird to think about, that two teams that are so close apart, were in a state tournament and not like, in a district, in the same district or whatever. So anyways, they finally played first time since 1981. Really fun to see that. And both sides obviously rallied around their teams and really made a fun atmosphere at the Corn Palace. And it's also interesting that track and field that those girls, that's a co-op for track and field, Ethan and Parkston. So that was another element. Obviously, those girls know each other very well on the court and off the court. As far as the game itself, Ethan, they're playing really well down the stretch, and they kind of continued that, picking up a nice win against Parkston. So the wrestlers, here we go. Late in the season, they're certainly playing well. But that was definitely fun, a fun one to cover with all the kind of historical significance going into that one.
Always fun to see some of these interesting matchups at the Corn Palace that we don't get to see very often. Good stuff. Let's talk about what you're working on a story about Brooke Jensen, a future D1 player playing at Vermilion. Tell us a little bit more.
Yep, Brooke Jensen, been a big part of the Vermilion girls basketball team the last few seasons. Big part of that state championship run last year for the Tanagers. Anybody knows basketball in South Dakota, her mom is Becky Flynn Jensen, who had just a great career for Wakanda. Won some state championships, finished her career as the all-time leading scorer in South Dakota girls basketball history. Went to Creighton, all that stuff. And now, this is her daughter, Brooke, and she admitted that when she was growing up, she kind of felt the pressure of kind of having that whole aura with her mom, kind of always, everybody talking about her mom and all this and that. But she said as she's gotten older, she's learned to embrace it. And at the same time, she's certainly trying to leave her own mark and her own legacy on the Vermilion girls basketball team. And she's certainly done that. She's an all-stater, going to USD next year to play for the Coyotes. So fun story to write about Brooke Jensen.
It'll be fun to check out on 605sports.com. Make sure you look for that. All right, we always talk about a couple games you're looking forward to, and there's a couple that don't pop off the page, but they are very interesting. Let's talk about Bennett County taking on Kadoka in girls basketball. Both teams have just 2 losses, and they play on Thursday.
Yeah, this will be an interesting one going into the season for both of those teams. They're both in Region 7B, both with 2 losses. They're both at the top of the standings in that region. And I just think it's a couple teams that, aren't necessarily getting a lot of attention. Bennett County, they are receiving votes in the latest polls and everything. But I just think this is a big one going into postseason for both of those teams, because I think more than likely that they will come out of that region in 7B, and then they'll represent their region in the SODAC. And then from there, I always say you just never know. It's always about the draw and who they would match up with. But I definitely think this should be one that we should keep an eye on as we head into regions, because it could give us a good idea kind of how these teams look going into the postseason. And I definitely think a couple teams that we should keep an eye on there and for Class B girls.
Yeah, some of these teams, it feels like a surprise when they make it, into the SODAC 16 or the state tournament, but we should be paying attention. That's one game definitely to pay attention to. And on the boys' side, there's fun games to pay attention to as well. Let's talk about Castlewood taking on Esteline Hendricks.
I think another one that it'll be a good test for both of those teams going into the postseason. First of all, everybody knows about Castlewood, Brian Lowy, an all-state center, and obviously you got some good pieces around him. There they are at the top of the rankings and the seed points and all that stuff in Class B. But Esteline Hendricks to me is an intriguing team. You look at what they've done this season, 16-3 up to this point. Their 3 losses are to 2 Class A teams and Elton, Lake Bend, and Dual, and the Rapid St. Mary's, which is a top 3 team in Class B. So Esteline Hendricks is a team I think that's kind of flying under the radar a little bit. We just don't really talk much about them. They're in a very tough region with Castlewood, Woolsey, Wessington Springs, and DeSmit. We know DeSmit's been all about in Class B basketball the last few years. So, and Esteline's right there, and we're just not really talking about them. So this will be an intriguing one to see how this one shakes out, really for both sides, I think. And then as we go into postseason, we'll see how this shakes out, when it comes to the region, kind of standings and everything. So that's a boys game I'm definitely keeping an eye on.
Yeah, there's some fun ones coming up here in the next week or so. That's definitely on the radar now that Ryan Deal's all over it. All right, Ryan, I appreciate the time as always. We'll look forward to chatting with you once again next week.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Jason.
Time to talk some big games coming up, and the girls starting region play already by the time we talk next week, so they just have maybe 1 or 2 games left in the season. Not a lot of big games to talk about coming up with them in the next week, but let's talk about boys games coming up in the next 7 days. There's going to be some really good ones. Rapid City Christian has a couple of tough games coming up. They play at Rapid City Stevens on Friday and then at Spearfish on Saturday. Two teams in AA that really could define how good this team could be as they continue to test themselves with one of the toughest schedules in all of Class A. And Rapid City Christian playing really well right now. We'll see how they do against those AA opponents. Harrisburg takes on Brandon Valley, and Brandon Valley has a couple of big games coming up next week on the boys' side, and Harrisburg starts it off Thursday with what could be a tone setter for both of these two teams. Brandon Valley eked out a victory on Tuesday in overtime against T. Of course, Harrisburg lost a game last week in Rapid City. Both teams desperately want to get back on track and stay in that top 5 and get positioning for the SODAC 16. Clark Willow Lake takes on Hamlin in the season finale of the year, and Clark Willow Lake has worked their way into the top 5 in the standings. It'll be a really tough test going into Hayti to take on the Chargers, a team that has been, just as good as advertised, coming in as the state champs, defending state champs, and staying at or near the top of the rankings all season long. So that will be a tough test for them as well. And then Tuesday night, the game of the week, the Mitchell Colonels on the boys' side. They're also the defending champions, taking on Brandon Valley. And Brandon Valley was number 1 as late as last week. Just dropped off that pedestal, but they definitely are a team that is going to test themselves over the next few days here at the end of the season against tough opponents. They got a couple of tough wins the last couple of games, but they will need to keep that up if they want to stay ranked as high as possible in the SODAC 16 seedings coming up. So Tuesday night, Mitchell at Brandon Valley. That should be a really good one. If you have any comments or thoughts on the show, feel free to reach out to me on the social media channels at 605Jandy. Always love to talk basketball, and if I'm out of the game, make sure to say hi as well. Can't wait to preview some postseason basketball coming up on next week's show. Once again, Jason Andera signing off. We'll see you next week.